Hello, and welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer. This is Dr. Greer, and I'd like to thank the folks at the World Puja Network for hosting us every 2 weeks on their program. And I'm really honored today to have with me Colin Andrews, who's been a dear friend and a man whose work I trust and respect tremendously. We first met in the early 90s. I believe it was 1991 or 1992. And as all of you know, Colin Andrews is the man who coined the term crop circle and has been studying the crop circle phenomenon and the associated events around the crop circles since the late 1980s as one of the very earliest people on the scene. So, Colin, thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Steve, and obviously my feelings towards you and your work are mutual.
One of the things I want to just share with the listeners is that when I first met Colin, I was at a conference and we were both presenting, I believe, and I remember sitting in the audience and Colin was going through some of the crop circle images that he had from whatever year that was. I think it was 90 or 91, and the ones that had happened in the years before. And as he went through these images and described what was happening, I had such a shift in consciousness, and it was almost as if those images of these amazing formations in the crops there in England and a few other locations as well, but mainly there in that very special area of Wiltshire, I felt as if I was in an altered or higher state of consciousness, as if a visual mantra had transported me to another place. And I've never shared that story with Colin, but that's the experience I had sitting in the audience and just seeing those for the first time, because I wasn't familiar with that whole area. And it was then that I vowed, well, my God, I have to go over there. So beginning in 1992, I began taking a team over there to England to make contact with the hyperdimensional, higher dimension ET crop circle makers and with the phenomenon that was there. And we, of course, have just returned from an expedition this summer that was amazing, nothing short of amazing. And so that's really how I first got introduced to Colin Andrews and his work. So, Colin, if you'd like to share with folks sort of an update and a kind of an overview of what you'll be presenting at the conference at Rio Rico, Arizona, October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. As you all know, we're going to be there for 3 days and 3 nights out under the stars at night making contact, and then during the day we'll be hearing from brilliant people like Colin Andrews and Richard C. Hoagland and Dr. Ted Loder. And I'd just like to give you an opportunity to give an overview of what's been happening lately as an update for the listeners of the World Puja Network, and also sort of what you'll be going through in Rio Rico.
Certainly. Well, thank you, Steve. To start with, just to very briefly touch upon the comment that you were making there about the effect that the images, some of those images, had on you in the audience when we first met. It was really a very parallel feeling and experience for me also when I saw the first set of circles that formed across in 1983. And it, too, grabbed me that way. I mean, I was looking not at the photograph, but at the real design right below my vehicle. I was on high ground. And it grabbed me, and one can only say that. It is a very special feeling. It certainly is a spiritual feeling. There were 5 circles forming across, and there's a certain knowing. And, we can throw all the research in the world at this, and we have. There is a very strong and I think important element to all of it, and that is intuition, the natural gut feeling that one has, and I think we'll probably be getting into that, during this program. But it was the knowing that here was something important, and if the Akashic record, all that has been and will be, is out there secured in some kind of consciousness machine, I was being told, I think, in those feelings that this is your job, buddy. And, whilst I had a considerable amount of responsibility in regional government at that time, that's exactly what it turned into, my job. And here I am now, nearly 30 years later, and we're still talking about it, living it, and growing with it, and seeing the importance now more than ever in it. And so that was kind of a long touch upon the pattern, but what I will be doing, Steve, this year and Rio Rico will be an extension and moving beyond the last year's discussion and presentation. And I thought actually yours and mine were actually extremely similar because we were touching upon the same things but coming from different places, you with the UFO and contact and myself with ground patterns and interaction that clearly is going on with individuals, researchers and people making some of them. It's a fascinating field and one that we have to be honest enough to grab in its entirety to get the best out of it. It's really like wringing the flannel out, you know. We've got to squeeze every drop of juice we can out of what we already know before we can move forward with pure truth and development of intuition. And so this year, there's a lot to cover in Rio Rico. I'm looking forward to it because I think you and I agree, I know we agree, that we are at a crossroads. And 12 months, and that's not quite what it is, since we were together last in Arizona, we have traversed another 12 months of a transition unequaled in the time that we know, in the history that we know of, in humanity's history. And so in that period of time, we now have had another crop circle season. We've had many more experiences. We have people that are making some of them, and I don't wish to harbor upon that, but it's an important part of it that's been closed out of the loop by many the term is researchers, but without being kind of pedantic and rude, research really is about digging for the truth wherever it takes you.
Right.
And unfortunately, because we are looking at that word hoax and people making, it's often closed out, and so therefore we've lost some information if we don't look at it. And in this last 12 months, indeed the weeks that you were there and I was there, people that were making circles were going public. I think because they too are getting the message that things are happening to them. There are experiences they're having that they didn't share a few years ago because it was battleground. People that made them were basically afraid to say they were, and indeed others had other agendas that they weren't going to tell us anyway. But the bottom line is that they're having the same experiences that the researchers are having, that the lay public are having, and that is very, very clear now. I don't need to convince myself. I know you don't. And the public now, I think, are getting into a position where, we go with this extraordinary core fact in the crop circle phenomenon, or we lose it, and we will probably finish up doing another cycle of humanity, which is based upon deception, lies, and a lack of spiritual progress. And so there is the challenge. And the challenge is that from a position of inner faith, inner trust, can you and do you believe what's happening here to those people, to many individuals? I'm sure there will be people, as there were last year in Rio Rico, who've had their own experiences and don't need convincing either.
Right.
I think that whatever we say about it from the research perspective, these are raw truths that individuals sometimes have to experience for themselves to believe. We unfortunately live in a society that have been too often led by people who have deceived us and continue to do so. And so therefore there is a natural inclination not to trust. Well, this is a core belief. This is faith within us as individuals that we're being challenged with. A term I think I used last year and I would use again is that I believe that without putting too much of a kind of a religious sound to this, we're all of us, every single one of us, as couples, as countries, as religions, as businesses, all of us are being placed very slowly at this moment in time in front of the Hall of Mirrors. And those mirrors are pulling out of us lies, deceptions, perhaps secrets that we've held ourselves. You and I shared, as did Lynn last year, things that we had kept to ourselves. For I think, and I'll speak for myself, Steve, you will for yourself, and that was that in my case, I had an experience when I was 5 years old,
right,
which only my family knew about, that I only felt last year to be able to share reasonably comfortably because of the social engineering by the fools in government and the fools that have colored and distorted for humanity the truth. And so they had carved out and engineered the environment so that the word UFO or abduction or extraterrestrial, all these terms colored us and damaged our characters. And so people were very slow in stating those. Well, this is where we are. There is no further time for gray areas or sitting on the fence. This is a time of speaking our truth so that we can develop and grow. So to be brief, as an overview of 2010, we will cover some of these new experiences at Rio Rico, which feed into the time and the time that we have left to make some very significant changes in the way humanity works. And I will, of course, cover the fact that there were less in the way of crop circles this year in all countries that have experienced them now for quite some years. They've evolved in an upward trend until last year in most cases, in most countries. That has been a downward trend this last few months. They're more widely located across England rather than the very, very hot spot around Silbury Hill, Avebury, in central Wiltshire, central southern England. And the designs were as exquisite as ever, an increase in those 3D effects, which I think you saw and we did too. Unfortunately, you and I didn't meet as we had planned to do due to so much going on. And I think just to end this little piece for me, for you to get back in here, is the negative side of this, of which there is a positive outcome, I believe. There has been an explosion of bad feeling, which is part of where we all are right now. And the bad feeling, I think, and the animosity is coming within the research fraternity because there are individuals who have placed a great deal of effort and themselves into the work, only to feel, and this is, I'm not saying this, these are real individuals that I've spoken to out there, who feel that they've been conned, deliberately manipulated, for different agendas that are working with a hardcore of what I think they would call a cabal in the research fraternity in central southern England. And I don't want to go into names, and I won't. It's not my business. I've never done it. But I would reiterate myself that this is a time for the inner truth from all individuals involved in this research. It's only by embracing every part of it that we will now move forward, and there's limited time to do so. And just to hand back to you, Steve, I noted, and I do believe that you carried out some of your work in some of the more simple circles which showed up at Westbury and also at Silbury Hill, which were much more reminiscent, not precisely so, but certainly much more reminiscent of those early days in the 80s that we began to see as the regular crop circle before they evolved.
Right. Oh, we did.
So that was it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I thought you did.
And some of what Colin, what you're referring to here, in terms of the truth coming out about this, and of course, many times there's this temptation on people who get attached to a paradigm to shoot the messenger, and been shot at quite a bit. And the corollary in the crop circle world, where it's coming out that there are the crop circles that have been, the word has been hoaxed or been made by people, and then there are the ones that are from some higher consciousness and trans-dimensional source, and clearly have a connection to, I believe, a trans-dimensional and extraterrestrial source, because I've been in them and seen these objects and had contact with these objects. and including entire spacecraft that have hovered in the field, as you know, back in the first year we went there.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think that at the other end of it, the corollary in the crop circle world in terms of the UFO subject is that when I started coming out in the mid to late 90s, with the fact that I had people in the intelligence community who had confirmed that many of the so-called abductions were actually being done by very advanced electronics by humans, hoaxing ET contact so that people would be afraid and try to color the whole subject in a way that would put us on a war footing with these visitors. And I think this is one of the things that happens is that there's the old joke that during the 1960s, during the anti-war movement, if you had 15 anti-war activists together, 12 of them were from the intelligence community. And I have found this to be very true in crop circle circles and UFO circles, that many of the people there are actually tied into other operations and agendas. But this is all spilling out. Now, I can tell people that in terms of how seriously the intelligence community takes the work that Colin's been doing and that we've been doing, and you can tell many stories, but something that I have not talked about actually publicly on this show is that in Rio Rico last year, now this would be only about 10 months ago, we were, because it was in late October, that we were there. This year it's earlier. It's October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. And by the way, you can find out more about that at CSETI.org. That's CSETI.org if you would like to come. I think that one of the remarkable things that happened is that we were having a luncheon one afternoon, sitting on the balcony of this lovely resort where we hold this conference, and here comes a unmarked helicopter with the door open and a man holding some instrument or camera out, and it's hovering right there, couple hundred feet or less off the balcony, filming us.
Yeah, and I remember it well.
And you remember that.
I sure do.
Dr. Ted Loder was there and got a photograph of it. And this was an unmistakable comment, and this was so in your face. And I'm sure part of that, they can do things more stealthily than bring a helicopter in broad daylight right off a balcony of a restaurant where we're dining. I'm quite sure it was an intimidation tactic, which, of course, neither Colin Andrews nor myself are easily intimidated. If we were, we'd be out of this business decades ago. But it was a comical and at the same time dramatic demonstration of the extent to which the intelligence community really doesn't want the truth out and are going to monitor, and when they can, to spin it. And one of the beautiful things about Rio Rico is that the people coming are all going to tell the truth as they know it, whether it's Richard Hoagland about the Phobos and Mars and hyperdimensional physics, or Dr. Loder about new energy and anti-gravity, and what I'll be presenting, what Colin Andrews will be presenting, because we know that it is time, that we're really, the time for deception and nonsense is quickly closing, and that there's an unveiling of this truth, which is really about the whole of the earth and humanity entering into another chapter of our existence that will be as different from today as today is from 10,000 years ago. And it's not something that's going to take 10,000 years. We're talking years to decades. And so it's an entire transformation of life on Earth, and the option of further sort of stalling this is over. And I know that a lot of the people who are in the intelligence community that I've met with at the CIA and elsewhere know this. They don't know what to do about it because they've got the hardliners who want to continue the game as long as they can string it out. But they know that I think they know they're not going to win that overall struggle for the truth, that the truth is going to come out one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. The truth will speak for itself, as they say.
Right, and of course, sorting through that, I mean, one of the problems is that I have found that, I used an analogy years ago, that if you're going to have if you really want to hide something, a gold nugget, you dump a ton of fool's gold on top of it and hope no one's doing an assay. And this is exactly what's happened in the UFO subject and also in the crop circle field, in my opinion. And so I think there is a sense that you have to have people who have their truthometers on, their truth meters on, and are really getting down to the bottom of what is really happening with all of this and what is the message. and what is the vision that's being shown to us, because it's really a portal opening into the human future is what I think is happening.
Absolutely so. An area that interests me in all of this really, I think, comes off of the back of the term urge. You know, when you have an intuitive feeling, just simply that, a natural kind of animal kind of instinct, something external to your own mind process is, you might say, interfering or breaking into your own processes. This word I'm hearing more and more of, and I feel that I'm learning more and more about that feeling of a design appearing and it appears. I mean, the Doug and Daves, as we know, it's fairly well known now that, Doug and Dave said that right back in 1991, that even though they conceded to so much, and I think lied about so much, they were giving some of what they had done, making it public for the first time. But when John McNish from BBC Television thought he had a new television program out of the revelation that they were all man-made, for Doug Bauer then to speak to his colleague in front of John and saying, the strange thing about this is that we would often say to one another, it's as if we're being told to make them. Well, that kind of flows over the top of the heads of a lot of people,
right.
But that is to this day what is happening. Matthew Williams just last week, a guy whose name we hear about, it's not, people that make circles are not everybody's cup of tea. They've not been my cup of tea for so long. One particular breed of them are nothing but a darn nuisance, They're deceiving and they're kind of putting smoke screens across what we're all trying to dig into. But this guy has actually in some ways been quite helpful. And, he has now just gone public with his own YouTube video, I believe, that I was being shown just a couple of days ago, talking about the same situation where he would have this overwhelming urge to go out and make a design, to find that he'd make this design, and there are others in the same field within 100 feet making another design which he has not been any part of knowing, until they've both finished and left the field, to find that these two patterns actually connect in some way, either head to tail, in other words, in positioning, or in meaning. So, I mean, that's just one story and one event, but the chances of that happening are beyond, statistically, are millions to one.
So you wonder, so this brings up the question of what consciousness is working through even the hoaxers.
Absolutely.
And, the ones that we call the real crop circles, and then they're the ones that are the hoax ones. But if the hoax ones are actually, in not all cases, some are just the nuisance ones, but if some of them are from people who are getting some kind of message or imagery or impulse from some higher dimensional consciousness, then that in of itself is phenomenal.
It really is. Taking that line, Steve, that back in '89, when I was going through a divorce situation back in England, I was alone at that time, and this story. The account of what happened is that I focused my thoughts upon a pattern. It was a Celtic cross with a connecting ring through the satellites, connecting the cross together to a central feature.
Yeah.
And this was only in my head. It was very private. It was secret in the sense that I didn't intend it to go outside of my head. It was simply a personal experiment, and that I placed that out there to the highest forces and asked that it be produced as close to my home as possible. Now, without running through the whole story, it did appear. It appeared in a field, the last one to be harvested in the area, so it could not have been closer to my home. I had nothing to do with it,
right.
Of course. And, this is the thing, and you can look at this two ways. When Doug and Dave went public, they claimed to have made all the circles. It was that design that had them change their story because they couldn't account for the extraordinary details that were discovered in that design.
Right.
And even if, this was my point on this, and I don't think it's not everybody that gets it, but even if they had made it, why did they make it that night? And why did they place it in the field they placed it? Was it that I and you on other occasions and other people on other occasions transmit to other individuals a design which they are then urged to make. I mean, you can look at it several ways, but whichever way it is, this is something phenomenal. It is something phenomenal. We don't need to spend the rest of our days collecting stamps or looking for the real versus the hoax in scientific terms. It would be great to do it, but there's even dispute on that, as to whether the plant changes at the cellular anatomic level are really as accurate and as well secured and scientifically secured as they could have been. There's that whole debate. And yet what we do by making that the central need to make it, scientifically provable to be a real phenomena, we miss what's happening. So anyway, for me, it's as important as it ever was, and it's come to be so central to the time period that we're in, where all of these trend lines coincide, as it happens, around 2012. Not to get big on the prophecy here, but as you know, Steve, I with Cynthia just finished and is now in the bookstores the Complete Idiot's Guide to 2012. It was not our subject, but we spent a lot of 6 solid months speaking to people who it is, including the Mayan elders, and there's no doubt in my mind that these trend lines have been picked up by extraordinarily gifted scholars in that period, where they were able to decipher the interplay between the celestial positioning, which we would call astronomy,
right,
and human behavior, which of course we call astrology. And so they put these two together, and they were able to define a 26,000-year cycle, of which ends at the end of that in moving into the fifth age, 2012 through to 2033. And that period of time, as it happens, is precisely where everything else crosses over. The 8 billion people, the climate change, the things that we're looking at, you and I, this very moment as we speak on this radio program, with now 2 hurricanes, 1 tropical storm, and another wave coming off of West Africa, all plays into climate change and global warming, which is another subject. But there's a trend line that crosses over all the rest of them in 2012. The economy, the environment, the temperature, the cycle 24 and the solar activity, Earth changes, population, the disease and human health. It's a very strong case for the very things that we have already talked about here, the transition. This is the end of a cycle for humanity, and the very best qualities now, we have to move forward into this, actually, a perfectly wonderful opportunity to recreate how we do our business and how we respect one another and love each other sincerely and, work with that. This is it. I don't think there's no choice in this matter any longer. We come through and recognize and work with the very best of what we should have learned by now, or we've lost it. And I don't try not to be black about it. We wrote the book from a positive position, right, but not in any kind of new agey way that we're just trying to make people feel comfortable. This is a time to plan for a very difficult period. But what's coming out the other end is a blue and white light that is shining us toward a golden age, which will be wonderful if we make it.
Right. No, I couldn't agree more, 100%. And in fact, but that is the nature of all what we call in physics phase transitions, where on the one hand, you have an increasing number of coherence into a new field and a new way of functioning, but in the meanwhile, the rest of the environment is becoming increasingly chaotic. And this was described in physics many years ago as a phase transition. And so now one of the ironies of that is that those people who are becoming coherent and moving into this future period are the very forces that are driving, in many respects, the increasing likelihood of the chaos. And if you look at chaos theory, but also the phase transition in physics, if you take helium and you get the superfluidity in helium, when you get about 1% of the molecules in a container that are coherently aligned, it's those 1% or so of the coherently aligned molecules that then make this big leap. But just at the moment when it's going to go into this superfluidity where all the molecules then become transformed is when the ones that are not coherent become most chaotic. And that's what we're seeing. So we see on the one hand, if you look at humans as molecules, or if you look at, or nodes of intelligent life, that's part of the process, and so it's part and parcel, isn't it? I mean, it isn't as if, and that's part of the natural way. Now, how chaotic it gets has a lot to do with how people function together, and this is really part of, I think, the message of what we call the coherence in thought and consciousness that we do with CSETI and the contact protocols. And you related this kind of cross circle of a cross made of various circles that you visualized that then appeared in this field that was clearly not quote unquote hoaxed. And in '92 we took a team up on where Woodburr Hill is, and we visualized what we call the CSETI triangle, and it's 3 crop circles in an equilateral triangle connected by lines. And the next day, this crop circle was found at the base of Oliver's Castle, and there was no one who knew that we as a group were thinking and visualizing that particular shape in the world, except for the few of us that were up on Woodburr Hill that night.
I think, sorry, Steve. I mean, I'm sorry just to break in, but just really supporting you as one of the witnesses there. That stands out to me to be being one of the most extraordinary experiences. Multiple witnesses. I think there were about 50 of us, weren't there, that night? And nobody was coercing anybody as to what they freely thought, imagined as a symbol, and yet every single one of us had a variation of this very design that then showed up within sight of where we were stood.
Right, and this was so phenomenal when it happened, and of course we knew that this was, I call it a crop circle CE5, because I coined the term close encounter of the fifth kind, and that's when humans willfully and with intent, consciously and voluntarily make contact with this higher intelligence and these visitors, but with the purpose of a peaceful interaction, and that this was like a crop circle communication that was a CE5, just like yours had been back when you had visualized that cross made of circles. And I think that this part of the phenomenon, I hate to even use the word phenomenon because it trivializes it, but this part of the experience is really central because it's teaching us about the nature of the conscious hologram that is existence. That we always want to view everything in a material, outward way, in a reductionist way, but in reality, the work of Dr. John and the work of many others has shown that, in fact, everything is awake and everything can be altered by the consciousness and the thought of people, and particularly when a group of people, and this is what we're going to be doing at Rio Rico October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, when you have 100+ people sitting out on this roof terrace in meditation out under the stars doing these sort of visualizations and conscious meditations, it has an effect beyond what we can see. And then all kinds of amazing things happened. Last year while we were doing this, one of our members, Raven, and I don't know if you've seen this on the CSETI.org site, Colin, the sort of weird tetrahedral type
yes.
materializing right overhead. And during that, I was saying to people that I was seeing it, I was remote viewing it, and I could see sort of the trans-dimensional form of it. She heard that and with her camera clicked it, and there this object is. And whether everyone saw it or not is beside the point, because it was in the point of emergence out of trans-dimensional space-time over the area right above the roof deck where we were. But it's in the photograph, and it absolutely is not a hoax. And yet that was all being mediated through the consciousness and the meditation that the group was doing. And this is the sort of thing that happened this year in the crop circles, although I'll share this when we get to Rio Rico in more detail. But one of the things that happened that was absolutely amazing is that one of the first crop circles we went into that appeared the day that we arrived in England was this sort of three-dimensional cubic sort of form. Oh, yeah. And we went into this, and so many people had such an altered state of consciousness. Now, we were contacting the ETs as we went into this field. We had these electronic detectors, which were completely quiet, and we went and put them in the very center of this crop circle. Suddenly, they went into a full lock-on, like there was a continuous outpouring of transdimensional electronic energy. At that moment, everyone there became overwhelmed, almost overwrought with a beautiful emotion, beautiful. And some people on our team started taking pictures in the sky, and there were ET craft clearly in these images. We're going to show them at Rio Rico. And then there were these golden blue orbs that floated into the field that literally appeared over our heads. And this is daytime photography, no flash bulbs, nothing. When you see these pictures, you'll fall out of your chair. You will absolutely go, oh, my God. No. And so this kind of contact is what it's all about. And it turned out that we were so moved by this experience, we went back there to do our contact work at night, and I did a Puja, a Vedic Sanskrit ceremony, in the crop circle. And I have to tell you, this was the first time in my life, even though I've been a meditation teacher since 1975. I hate to admit that it's been so long, but since I was 20 years old. And I have never done one of these Sanskrit ceremonies in a crop circle. And what happened at that point, in terms of what came right around the Puja set, the beings, and we got photographs of them, it's truly amazing. People, when they see this, will go, my God. So we're going to go through all of this at Rio Rico.
Very interesting. Was this the design near Warminster, the cube?
We went to that one. This was the other one here, that was on a little lane. I can't remember the name of the town.
No, I know there were several.
The one that appeared after the Warminster one.
Yeah.
And we'll show a picture of it. It was stunning. It was a cubic, but we went in there literally the day after it appeared, and it was astonishing. And the very center of it. And, of course, it's interesting because you only see the three-dimensionality of it from above. And the one at Warminster, there are little standing stalks in areas that when you're in the crop circle look like nothing, but from above gave it its dimensionality.
Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely.
Beyond the ability of a human to hoax this.
Very extraordinary. That's one of the most extraordinary that I've ever seen as a visual effect.
I agree. It is absolutely one of the most extraordinary, and that is the one when we went into that field and we were, doing a sort of a group meeting. There were about 29 of us. We had a craft appear right over the field in a photograph that blipped and then blipped out.
Oh, my.
Broad daylight. Unbelievable.
Well, I think, that what we might be saying here, giving examples of also, is the importance of just acknowledging that we have designs that change the electrostatic field anyway of the area, the topography of the locality, and whether they are made by people or not, it really truly does not matter if what we are having here is an attractor to this kind of interplay. I mean, just to take another step in the direction that you have just done so with another design, the Mayan design of last year that was in the field opposite Silbury Hill.
Oh, yeah.
The police officer, that case where the Wiltshire policeman witnesses a police sergeant who has a lot of people under him, is responsible and his word is accepted to have people locked up in prison. This guy is like any police officer at that rank. We expect to believe them. And here in his testimony, he sees three beings well in excess, he says, of 6 feet tall, large, with long blonde hair, wearing the same white suits, hovering basically just above ground level, appearing to be testing plants along the edge of a Mayan design. Now, whether that design was placed there by extraterrestrial, for extraterrestrial, or for humanity, or by humanity, for humanity, and interaction by extraterrestrial, these are just combinations of the same material facts and details. So, for me, I do honestly think, and I will admit, hands up, I was very late coming to this, but a lot of friends taking this road, and that was in moving beyond the real versus the hoax. And because I do think that we're missing the point here by the kind of experiences you've just related there, Steve.
Right, and of course, everyone asks me, well, is there a portal here? I said there's a portal wherever people enter into this state of consciousness together.
Yeah.
And I was being interviewed yesterday by someone who is doing a show for the History Channel, and he was talking about the stargates. I said, well, in reality, every point in space and time is a stargate if you understand the structure of consciousness and what can happen through intent and the creative force that is within every person. And this is very much in the line of the understanding of the ancient traditions of. I'm reminded by this saying that is attributed to ancient Persia: "Thinkest thyself a puny form, when within thee the universe is folded." That the entirety of all that exists is folded as almost a quantum hologram within each person, and so the kind of experience that can come from attaining that state of awareness and knowledge, and then practicing these sorts of techniques, whether they're meditative or visualization or what have you, or group meditative events, is truly remarkable. And that's what we're going to be doing every night under the stars. And I think people who understand that can move beyond just sort of a transient phenomenon. Everyone thinks, oh, I want to see X, Y, and Z. And I say, yes, well, that comes in time. What's really important is to understand the creative force that's within each of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait for it. I mean, I have to say, as you're speaking and describing events at Rio Rico, just the thought and that of the wonderful location upon that the rooftop there, a very peaceful, gorgeous location. Cynthia and I thoroughly enjoyed it. We're looking forward to obviously meeting people there, yourself and Richard Hoagland and the full team, and see what happens this year. Last year was fascinating.
Oh, absolutely fascinating, and then the images we got, but then also the sort of reconnaissance we had. We had people trying to attempted to break into my hotel.
Oh my goodness, yes.
The helicopter that was hovering off the balcony while we're having. So it's a bit of a dynamic process, and people need to understand that the reason it is that there are those forces on this planet who do not want people to know the truth and who want to stop the contact. They want to keep a lid on it, or they want to channel the understanding of what contact is in a way that redounds to the benefit of the military-industrial war machine and those who want to create war, endless war. And I think that this is something that can't be trivialized and sort of blown past, is that there are very powerful interests that want to take the truth and pervert it, so that it begins to run to their own agenda. And the agenda is clearly one of centralized domination of the world through militarism and other types of isms. And I think that whether it's powerful religious organizations or financial entities or military organizations, as I view it, they're having their last hurrah, and that's the time of that is going to pass, and they better get ready for it, because I said to the head of Army Intelligence years ago when he was quite pissed off about what I was doing. And I said, look, you have your agenda and plans, but there's another agenda, and there's another plan, and there's a cycle opening, and it's beyond your power to stop it. And I said that right to his face, and he looked at me with such astonishment. But and I think that this is the knowledge that people need to have, so that they're not affected by these sort of nonsensical things that the folks who would want to put a spin on this entire experience or stop it or sort of truncate it. And what we found while we were in England this year, in fact, we did have helicopters that circled where we were. We filmed some of these military, but they didn't alter anything that was going to happen, because it was coming in from such a higher state of consciousness, transdimensional reality, that it was futile for them to even. Now, they might be able to suppress the full materialization of an interstellar vehicle because it might be risky. But 99.9% of what's going to happen is going to happen regardless of the childish things that these...
Absolutely. I might be naive, Steve, but I still have hope that these people, it's the them. Who are they that we talk about? But these people and they exist. I still am hopeful. I mean, we could put names out there; it wouldn't do us any good. But I am still hopeful that they will, as you might say, come to the negotiating table or come to the cooperation table. They are in the United States being slowly but surely boxed in, as you know, and you've been instrumental in some of this, that the UK have now started to release their papers, their secret papers. Brazil have done the same, France and so on, and countries are already disclosing information that relates to the United States. And so unless they move fairly quickly, they had just as well better run to the hills, because this is the way it's going. I do feel this as well I'll give you an example of something very strange that happened whilst we were in England.
Oh, yes.
That doesn't perhaps relate precisely to crop circles, but it does make the point that I think, and I certainly like to think, that there is something, you might say a guardian angel or something, but there is a force that is with us. We have both you and I have our flocks that don't like us for one reason or another. That's choice. That's you just kind of stick on your task. But I do say that I have felt on a number of occasions helped and supported through the minefield that the last 30 years has been. And this very quickly, I know we're coming towards the end of our time. Sorry, I've got sounds from another computer going on in the background. I apologize. I will try and okay. Sorry. That's out of it now. Here's something that happened, Steve. You probably will have some thoughts on this. I had, we'll say an inner feeling, instinctively a feeling that the trip to England might be my last. Now, I'm not being morbid. I'm just saying that I had that feeling, and I shared it with my family, that I had the feeling that I didn't know why. I just felt that this might be the last trip to England for a while, certainly. Well, I was with Paul Anderson, a friend and a researcher, at Silbury Hill and some simple circles that had shown up there that you're aware of.
Sure. We
left that site with Cynthia, with his family, his two sons, and his wife. And Paul headed out first, and by this time it's gone 11 o'clock, it's dark, on that terribly dangerous A4 highway with no street lighting at the base of Silbury Hill. So he headed off towards Marlborough in the distance, and I went around his wife, who was in a separate car with their sons. And, of course, I'm back in England, but now being used to driving in America, living here in America, very conscious that I've got to get to the other side of the road. And as I left, I became, for reasons I think was the fact that she sounded her horn to say goodbye, my attention was thrown for a moment, and I became so confused with headlights coming straight at me as to which way to go. And I did not know, truly did not know. I handed myself over to the above. I did not know whether to steer left or right of the headlights that were coming head on at me.
Oh,
and it was a terrible moment, and it shook me up for days. Cynthia is my witness to this. At the very last moment, I let go of the steering wheel. I thought, this is it. And it was just momentarily. And as I say, as my pressure of my hands released, the wheel was steered left, jerked to the left. And I swore that Cynthia did that saved us. And she swears to this day that she didn't touch the wheel.
Wow.
But the wheel was jerked left and saved us. There is no doubt about it. When I shared with Paul Anderson later, I said, did the family see anything, Paul? Something very strange happened. We were saved, and that wheel was not moved by me. It was jerked left. And he said, well, this is strange. He said, because I got to Marlborough, several miles away, as you know, along the A4,
yeah.
And I had this distinctive feeling that something might have happened. He said, I don't know why I had, but I pulled in. It was so strong. I pulled in and waited to see your car go by to make sure that you were still okay. And so I only share this because that was a lapse on my part. I take responsibility for it, but something else stepped in, and that story is not alone, but I don't think we have time probably to cover others. But I do get that feeling often or not, that something very strongly is helping us along this road.
Oh, absolutely. The unseen hand and forces. And, whether we're talking about the celestial and the angelic realm and the ancestral realm, those all exist, and they're very involved. And there's no question there are such things as the guardian angels. And I've had very similar experiences actually happen. And I think that's somehow through our own foibles and human weaknesses, we've managed to make it through the most impossible minefields. I've had so many people in the intelligence community, in the military, come up to me after a lecture and say, well, we don't know why you're not dead yet.
Yeah.
And they've said that to me very directly. And I said, well, I do. And then I'll refer to this sort of level of protection. And so that is what is around us, and we know it. And when we're doing these contact events, that's what we feel, and we never feel anything else but that kind of love and protection, and sort of at a higher celestial level that we know is operating.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely.
It is truly remarkable. And one of the things too, I just want to remind the listeners that if those of you familiar with the CSETI contact protocols, one of the protocols, of course, is consciousness and remote viewing and coherent thought and contacting the ETs. The other, one of them is, however, is that we use these tones that were recorded when the BBC with Colin Andrews was in a crop circle back, I believe it was in the late 80s.
Yeah.
Which we actually then send out over radio signals, because it's become sort of a signature tone that we send out, because it was a phenomenal event that happened. You may want to just share for a moment what happened, because it's become such a central part of what we use. And thanks to Colin Andrews, we have these tones, and they were analyzed, and then they were altered and slowed down. And as I understand it, last year these tones reappeared, or similar.
Yes, Well, we've had 3 incidences over the last near 30 years. Each time they have involved the same 5.2 kilohertz sound. One was, as you said, with the BBC, when their camera and other equipment was destroyed at that same time.
Right.
But enough was recorded of the event to be transmitted to the British people. As we went to the studio and they did this, it kind of set it up to transmit it to the British people. And as they went on air, the whole studio was knocked out. So that's a very brief surrounding the BBC incident. But the 1989 incident, when that was recorded, of which you have a copy, this has been the subject of all kinds of backroom discussions. And I say backroom because there was a report about the incident sent to Margaret Thatcher's cabinet and the Queen and Prince Philip. And as a result of that, and me making public early last year, the head of the Rio Rico conference, the papers and documents I had returned to me from the royal household and the British government, I actually was, threatened is the only way I can put it, and I'm saying it again on air now, so I can be taken to task if I'm saying anything that is untrue. I was instructed to remove certain letters that related to the precise developments that night when that sound was recorded, and which I had to do under threat of all kinds of legal steps, which I frankly couldn't afford to fight. But in brief, what we can say, and I cannot say anything about the letter that I have now withdrawn from the internet, is that the sound arrived from the east. It was very directional in its sound, in its positioning. We could hear precisely where it was coming from. This is about a dozen people: George Wingfield, Busty Taylor, Pat Delgado, myself, and a number of others. That's all on the website, which incidentally I guess I should say is www.colinandrews.net. All of this is on the website, and the sound came in. It moved around us purposefully. It knew it was interacting intelligently. It then stopped. There was an interaction with Pat Delgado. Pat was dragged backwards across that circle at an angle at which he should have fallen on his back. He was leaning backwards, being pulled by a force. There's a lot to this story, and there are multiple witnesses to it. It was subject to government reporting. and that's, I guess, as much as I can say, but you have got that sound, Steve, and I still to this day believe it to be a very important part of this.
Oh, it is, absolutely. And of course, what's interesting, we've got a very small, similar clip from Mount Shasta, where we're going to be actually we start Sunday for a whole week at Mount Shasta. And we've had similar tones at Joshua Tree and in Joshua Tree National Park. And I might just mention to people, we're going to be in Joshua Tree National Park November 7th to the 13th for a week, for those of you who want to join us for a week under the stars there. It's a stunning place. And when we were at Shasta a couple years ago, we were sitting, and we had this tone that came, and it was directional, and it came out of the thin air. We were in the middle of the national forest, and we got a little clip of it recorded on one of our team's cassette recorders, and then but when it came through, it was actually a multi-dimensional tone that virtually everyone in the circle saw the sound. In other words, the sound was so multi-dimensional that it created in the mind's eye a spherical shape. And so as it went beep, 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 beep through, you saw multiple spherical, like a string of pearls. And it was amazing. And this wasn't one or two people. This was 30 or 40 people. And so this is the kind of contact we have. And I tell people the contact is not just a visual or a craft materializing, or it's these tones. It's all kinds of things that happen because we're dealing with something that is, extraordinarily advanced and an enormously high intelligence. And so,
well, that's very interesting, and it for me is confirmed. Is another analogy to what you have just said. Is that with dowsing is real, but unless you believe in dowsing, it won't work for you.
Sure.
And seeing is believing, but I mean, the belief has to be within, I think, for the experience in some way. We had, as you know, that 50 that we were referring to the night the triangle appeared, and there are many other instances you and I have been together when things have happened under your kind of guidance with your protocols. But I would say, and perhaps you would have a different view. I don't know. We've not spoken about this, but my own belief is, I would certainly postulate that the belief has to be within the individuals involved for the full experience to take place. There is a certain respect that is shown for in humanity by wherever this is emanating from.
It really is. It is. This is the whole question of what is this belief? Well, it's really an affirmative knowing. It's a knowing of things not yet seen. It's a certainty, and it comes from deep within. And that's when all of these things. That's when magic really happens. Yeah. And that's what we're talking about. So, everyone wants to get locked in either to a subjective or an objective, either a scientific or a psychological paradigm. And what we're really dealing with is a paradigm that transcends and yet includes all of that. And that's what's very exciting about the nature of the era that's unfolding.
Absolutely.
Well, I'd like to make a comment. Those of you, again, interested in joining Colin Andrews and Richard C. Hoagland and Dr. Ted Loder and myself at Rio Rico, Arizona. It's a beautiful resort south of Tucson in the desert. We'll be there October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and also we'll be for a week up at Joshua Tree National Park, November 7th through 13th. So you can find out about all this at CSETI.org and CSETI.org, and also I hope you can go to Colin Andrews' website again. You want to share that again, Colin, so people can...
Yes, thank you, Steve. That's www.colinandrews.net.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank you, Colin, for joining me for this hour, and I'd like
That's
to thank
my pleasure.
The people at the World Puja Network who have given us this time every 2 weeks to share updates on what's going on with CSETI and the Disclosure Project and the OrionProject.org. And until next time, thank you all, and thank you, Colin Andrews.
Thank you, Steve. Look forward to seeing you there.
See you there. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.